Let's talk to the parties that are being effectively squeezed during this general election, perhaps for very different reasons. So let's talk to Lance Forman, who's a Brexit Party MEP and joins us now. Good morning to you, Lance.
Good morning to you. How are you?
Very well indeed. Now, you've got your big party launch later this morning. Nigel Farage has said he wouldn't publish a manifesto. He said because basically people don't trust manifestos anymore, these manifesto pledge breaking. But he says he is going to make a contract with the British people. Now, the party's standing in only 275 seats, far less than half of the seats. You're not standing in any of the Tory-held seats in 2017. And indeed, some of the other seats are held by Leavers across the country. But what is the main focus of the manifesto going to be? Because a lot of people see your party as a one-trick pony. It's about getting Brexit done, and there isn't any other stuff to talk about. What else have you got in your manifesto? Well that isn't a manifesto.
I think you're going to have to wait for the actual launch of the manifesto there. But I have to say, what Nigel said is absolutely right about manifestos. How can you possibly believe what Labour have said now? Unless you want Britain to sort of become the old USSR or the current Venezuela. It's an absolutely crazy manifesto. I mean, it makes the size of the state bigger than it's ever been. In the UK, it'd be the biggest in Europe. We would be like a former Soviet state. This is real socialism. This is not social democracy.
But hold on a bit. There'll be a lot of people who will have voted for Brexit who'd be maybe looking at your party in this election, who particularly in poorer regions in West Midlands and in the north of the country. We were told, the people who felt they were left behind, certainly during austerity, and they want to have a more nationalised spending. They want to have a bigger state sector. This is going to appeal to a lot of those voters, surely.
I don't think that is the case. I think a lot of them feel that that the reason we have to get away from Europe is because of issues like sovereignty and issues like a lot of these people work in small businesses and they see the challenges that small businesses have faced over the years with regulations. But the biggest issue, I would say, for Brexit right now in terms of our economy is the indecision. That is what's holding our economy back at the moment. We had 3 years discussing it. No business, I'm a business person, businesses can't invest. Foreign businesses that are thinking of investing in Britain can't invest because they just don't know what's happening. And if you look at what Labour want to do, they want to drag this whole discussion on for another year. It is crazy. We've just got to get this thing done. So, I think there's massive pent-up demand. I am absolutely convinced that the minute we get Brexit done, we're going to be booming in the UK. People really want to get on now. And Labour's policy to have another negotiation, not that I can imagine them negotiating anything sort of halfway decent, and then come back and recommend people vote against what they've just negotiated. It's just crazy. I mean, no sensible person could possibly support it.
Okay, well, let me go through some of the things that your policy document today is going to include, because they've already been announced by Nigel Farage, your leader. A cap on migration of 50,000 a year, well below that failed target by the Tories of 100,000 a year for the last few years. Abolishing the House of Lords, a large-scale tree planting programme across the UK, and a £10,000 allowance for every UK company before they have to pay corporation tax. There's a whole range of different policies there. But do you think any person considering voting for the Brexit Party this time round on December the 12th is going to be looking at any of the other details other than your being a pro-Brexit party?
Look, they might to some extent look at the other things, but the Brexit Party will not be the government. We will get some MPs and we'll be supporting, hopefully, a Tory government that will get Brexit through. And that's really our main aim here, is to hold, the Tory party's sort of feet to the fire. But, I guess people do ask us what our other policies are. And, we do have views. We've come, we're a collection of people that have come from all walks of life. And we do have views. But getting Brexit done is clearly the most important thing for Britain right now. Britain has to move forward.
Let's talk now to Liberal Democrat spokeswoman on Home Affairs, Christine Jardine. Good morning to you.
Good morning,
Good
Julia.
morning. Now, of course, you had your party launch, your manifesto launch earlier this week, rather overshadowed by the Prince Andrew story in the newspapers and then online the next day. But making a very different argument from Lance Forman. He says that he thinks that if and when Brexit happens, there'll be a big boom in the economy. Of course, your entire manifesto is based on two key things. One is that you don't want Brexit to happen at all. You would revoke if you had a majority. You want a second referendum if not. But also that there would be a £50 billion Remain bonus, which would be what would boost the economy.
Yeah, I was interested in what you're saying. If and when Brexit happens, I was interested in listening there. He said there's going to be an instant boom in the economy. Well, that's going to be 10 years from now, because if this withdrawal deal goes through, that's only the beginning. The only way to get it over with and get on with building the economy, building homes, tackling climate change is just to stop it. And, I'm fed up hearing people saying, it'll be over. No, it won't. This would just be the start of it.
I suppose, but for the voters who feel that their votes have not been enacted, implemented as yet, 3.5 years on, they would argue, well, we don't have to be that involved in what goes on in terms of a trade deal. We can leave that to the experts and then have a look at it at the end of the process, as opposed to whether or not of something that's been voted for in a referendum has actually been implemented or not. That I suppose is what has sort of exercised people and sort of kept our politics in paralysis for all these years.
The inability of the Conservative government to do anything is what's kept us in a paralysis. And I think now what we are saying is we want to move on. We want to put an end to Brexit and use that Remain bonus to reinvigorate the economy, to build homes. We are announcing details of our plan today to build 300,000 homes over the Parliament. We want to make sure that this housing crisis which we're in is dealt with. Okay. Now, these are the things, actually, Julia, that I think matter to people. They want to see houses built. It's like, young couples getting married want to be able to afford a new home. People want to be able to be secure in the knowledge that their children will have a firm future, that, that they'll be able to afford childcare when they go back to work. And that's what we want to do. That's what we want to provide. And I think we have to be realistic and say that if we go ahead with this Brexit nonsense, then that is going to be much, much more difficult. And we have a plan to be able to do those things to tackle climate change right away.
But you talk about you have to be realistic. You also have to be realistic about the Lib Dems' chances of actually being in office as a majority government. That you haven't seen the Lib Dems surge. Some polling has suggested that actually plastering Joe Swinson's face all over the manifesto and the battle bus and the campaign leaflets hasn't actually been the wisest move in terms of the public reaction to her. In which case, you are looking, if you want to have any of your policies implemented, whether it's on Brexit or anything else, going into coalition or certainly backing up another political party. Your leader has said she won't back either Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn, but realistically, would she, if either of those leaders was, if there was a big loss and they stood down, would your party put a Labour government in power? Would they put a Tory government in power? Are you in talks discussing what you would do, which party you would support?
We've been clear that, we won't put either of them in power and there won't be coalitions. We are looking at gaining seats for the Liberal Democrats. We're the only people who can actually stop Boris Johnson, because we are the only party which is standing against the Tories, which is standing against Brexit. The Labour Party, I'm not quite sure what the Labour Party are doing, but they're coming out with an outlandish manifesto, which the Institute of Financial Studies has said the sums don't add up. They are not clear on Brexit. So we are offering the only real alternative, but we are not going into a coalition, and we will not put either Jeremy Corbyn or Boris Johnson, as Joe has said, in number 10.
Yesterday saw the launch of the Labour Party manifesto. £83 billion tax hikes involved in paying for their massive, massive programme in government. They say they're just going to be taxing the rich, the top 5%, and corporations. But do their numbers add up? Well, let's talk to the man everyone turns to find out. Director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the think tank, Paul Johnson is here. Good morning to you, Paul.
Good morning.
So, do the numbers add up?
Well, I'm not even sure if that's a question you can ask about numbers quite that big. So they're talking about 55 billion of investment spending. That's doubling what the government does. So I think the real question there is that credible? I mean, not what is the right number, but could you actually increase government investment by that within a parliament? You certainly couldn't do it within 1, 2 or 3 years. I doubt you could do it within 5. Just think of the skills that you'd need, the planning you'd need,
and a lot of this is things like the house building,
green energy, roads, rail infrastructure, hospitals, schools, all those sorts of things. So what I think about that, I guess, is if it were an aspiration to get there over a sort of decade, I think there's a strong case for more investment in the UK by the government, but you really do need to show that you can do that efficiently and effectively and on the right kinds of projects.
And that's simply the manpower, the skills. We were talking to someone about the housing issue.
All of those sorts of
the
things.
number of bricks available, just
exactly,
things like that.
All of those things. I mean, it is important to be clear about the scale. This would double what the government does at the moment. So if you want to get there in a decade, then provide a kind of really serious plan about what you would do, how you would do it, and so on. So we're saying none of that will be covered by tax increases. They're quite explicit. They're very happy to borrow that additional amount each year, and they're very happy to see the national debt sort of continue to rise. So that's one part of it. The other part is the 80 billion, and this is another enormous number that they're talking about for day-to-day spending, i.e. not for building stuff, but for paying people to work in the health service or providing free higher education or what have you. Now that's another enormous number, and put those together and you take spending, public spending, to its highest peacetime level ever in the UK. Ever, yeah. Well, peacetime, yes. Mm-hmm. And they say that would be matched by 80 billion of tax rises, but they say that all of those tax rises would be on companies and the rich, essentially nearly all on companies. And I think that's where it begins to get less credible, because again, there are countries in Western Europe, Scandinavia, France, Germany, Netherlands, who do spend that kind of amount on public services, but all of them have higher taxes on people on ordinary kinds of earnings, and none of them pay for it in the way that Labour is suggesting. And if you really were to increase taxes, as they suggest, on companies, that would take company taxation in the UK to essentially the highest, certainly the highest in the G7 and almost the highest in all of the countries in the advanced world.
I mean, this is one of the key issues, isn't it, about whether or not, people, most people are very happy to vote for there to be extra spending that they aren't paying for. But in 2017, they were talking about far less spending now than they're talking about in this manifesto pledge. But also, crucially, both times around, it's the top 5% who'll pay for it, not 95%. So basically, most people can say, look, this is free money for them. Are you saying categorically it is not possible to fund this amount of extra spending, either from taxation, if you're not taxing people on ordinary incomes or people on middle incomes?
Well, it's not free money in any case. I mean, it's really important here, because if you really were to increase that scale of tax on companies, well, in the end, companies don't pay tax. I mean, either they put up prices, or they cut wages, or they reduce the returns to savers and people with pensions and so on. That is literally the only possible way that companies pay tax. So it has to be people in the end. So in a sense, it's misleading to say even this set of proposals wouldn't affect people who aren't in the top 5%. But I think in addition, I think if you really want to transform the state, and as I say, I think there is a perfectly plausible case for saying we want to transform the way the country works. I think you ought to be honest about the fact this isn't just going to affect the taxes paid by people earning over £80,000. If you look at all international precedent, where you have a bigger, more active state, you have higher taxes pretty much across the board. And that is perfectly possible. It's perfectly possible economically. You can have a successful economy,
as we see in the Scandinavian states.
Exactly,
yes.
With more public ownership, more tax, more spending, but not in world experience, at least, not one where all of that comes just from the sorts of tax rises that Labour are proposing.
And looking at some of the big earnings from tax rises, which the Labour Party is looking to, particularly its corporation tax. Now it's currently at 19%, one of the lowest levels in the developed world. They want to put that back up to 26%, and even small firms with profits under £300,000 would pay 21% in corporation tax. What effect would that have? They're claiming they'll raise more than £23 billion in that, with that move alone. Is that feasible?
Well, it's probably in the first year or two, yes, because as companies don't adjust their behaviour, in the long run, it will probably be less than that. How much? Because we might get less investment, multinationals and so on might decide to go elsewhere. Companies might put more effort into into avoiding it. It's very hard to know what the long run impact is, but it's important to be clear that 23 billion is only about half of the increases in corporation tax that they're proposing, because there are a series of other changes. And you're also right when you say that the current headline rate is very low by international standards, but the effective rate of corporation tax in the UK is actually about average, and that's because we've actually got quite mean sets of allowances for investment and other things. So it's really important to take account not of just the headline rate, but what the effective rate is.
The overall figure, yeah.
The overall figure is really important, because it looks like, if you just look at the headline rate, 26% looks about average for OECD countries. But if you look at the actual bite it would have, it would take us right to the top.
I mean, there's also taxes on transaction tax would raise £8.8 billion on City of London trading in a wide range of financial products, and it's basically
extremely uncertain as to how much that would rise. That would raise. I mean, it's and again, is
that because banks would just move overseas if they face that tax?
I mean, or relabel the sorts of things they're doing. This would be an extremely complex thing to collect. And again, even if you did collect it, somebody pays that, and again, probably the people who pay that are retail investors and savers, because what that is a tax on the transactions that are being made by pension funds and all sorts of other people who are managing money. Now, I mean, some of that might, we might be pleased about that, might reduce the absurd salaries that some people in the city earn, but some of it would come back and hit others.
And in terms of the ability to tax avoidance, they're promising a comprehensive tax transparency and avoidance program. I mean, look, every government, I think, the last 20 years has been promising that. We see it across the board, whether or not that's achievable, but also a tax specifically on global companies. It's been billed very much as a tax on big tech firms, the Amazons, the Facebooks, the Googles, which a lot of people would agree don't pay what most people would consider, although their legal share of tax, their fair share of tax, given the huge profits they make, the way they're able to sort of siphon money into different jurisdictions to pay a lower rate of tax. But this is actually going to be a tax on all multinational firms on a slice of their global profits. I'm wondering how that's actually going to work.
Well, there's there are some very active proposals going through the OECD at the moment. The thing about taxing multinational companies is that to do it effectively, you need to do it on a multinational basis, and that means you need to get an agreement across a range of countries, and that agreement will occur, or hopefully will occur, across a whole bunch of countries within the OECD. Again, I think like their tax avoidance number, the number that they've got there is, to put it generously, uncertain, and I don't think one could bank on that kind of money coming in. There is a case for changing the way in which we tax multinational companies, but it gets very risky if every country tries to do that individually. What you need to do that is on an agreed basis, and I think whichever government got in would be taking part. Well, indeed, the current government is taking very active part in those OECD discussions. And
just bringing it back to ordinary people, income tax will rise for anyone earning more than £80,000. Interestingly, just about £500 more than an MP gets paid. What a coincidence! But Ben, Labour say a little more income tax. This is actually looking at the 45p rate of tax kicking in at £80,000 instead of £150,000. And if you earn over £125,000, you pay a super rich rate, which we're told could possibly be 50p, but it hasn't been spelt out yet. This would raise a total of £5.4 billion. But just to reiterate, lots of people on average earnings or minimum wage saying 80 grand is an absolute fortune and they should be paying higher rates of tax. But your analysis at the Institute of Fiscal Studies, you're saying that this, corporation taxes and all those taxes on business and that tax on the extra earnings, on the earnings of the people at the top end of the society, the top 5%, you're saying that isn't, on your calculations, enough to pay for what Labour say they want to spend?
Yeah, I mean those taxes on people earning over 80,000. I mean you're right. You're correct. You quoted the number there saying of 5 billion, and that's plausible. You might get 5 billion. You might get a bit less from doing that, but that's 5 out of the 80 that the party are talking about. And I think so you're getting 75 billion from effectively, well, not hidden taxes, because some of them are actually quite sensible changes to capital gains tax and so on that they're proposing. But you're getting the vast majority from corporates and from this transaction tax and other things. If you really want to raise that amount of extra tax, you can get some, certainly. You can get a significant amount from changing corporation tax and from changing some of these other things. But you really do need to look at the fact that at the moment it's no error, no mistake, that 2/3 of the tax that we raise is from VAT, national insurance and income tax. And if you're going to really ramp up the total level of tax you get, you're going to have to get a significant fraction from those three taxes.
It's a huge document. Your own leader described it as a radical document, massive change in the amount of state spending, massive end to certainly the austerity years. But the big question marks that have been raised today have been about how on earth you're going to fund it all. So talk me through why you think organisations like the Institute for Fiscal Studies are wrong when they say that, frankly, you can't fund all this with just raising taxes on business and raising taxes on the top 5%. Why do you think their numbers are wrong and your numbers do add up?
Well, because the Institute for Fiscal Studies are entitled to their opinions, but the bottom line is our economists have worked on this one and come to a different conclusion. The reality is, in this country, isn't it interesting? We were able to spend £500 billion worth on quantitative easing. It cost 1.5 trillion in one fashion or another, according to the Office for National Statistics post-crash, to get a grip of things. But here we are coming along with direct investment in our economy, in our public services, in our capital, spread over a 10-year period, and suddenly, which are proposals which are perfectly consistent with ordinary social democratic expenditure in Europe, in the likes of Germany, France, Italy, Denmark, Sweden, and suddenly the world's going to fall in because the British are doing something that the rest of Europe have been doing for years.
Okay, well,
that's the context.
Okay, well, let's look at that. There's issues one by one. I mean, first of all, you say it's the Institute for Fiscal Studies' opinion. I mean, they are probably the most respected think tank in this country when it comes to economic affairs. I don't think that they would argue it's a matter of opinion. That they would say they're looking at the facts. But also, you talked about the post-crash spending. Yeah, we know there were huge amounts of money pumped into the economy, a huge expense to the taxpayer. But that's the point. There was huge expense to the taxpayer. That we did actually end up seeing a huge increase in national debt, huge increase in the deficit, and we've been living with the costs of that ever since. So are you saying that's what you want to see as well? Because there was a huge cost to every single man, woman and child in this country as a result of that extra spending to bail out the banks.
The important thing is there's a difference between investment in the economy. Look, the expenditure that we're proposing in relation to the national transformation, which is the Green Industrial Revolution, the Social Transformation Fund, is investment in our services. And we all know that a business that invests, a business doesn't invest, if you compare us to a business doesn't invest just for the sake of it. It invests to get a return on the capital employed. That's a pretty fundamental part of any business, and it's the same with the United Kingdom. You have to invest to get a return on that. You invest to get a return. That's the principle that we've got to follow here.
Well, indeed. I mean, there's no, absolutely. But let's talk about the investment side of things, because we spoke about this with the IFS, and £55 billion of this is investment spending, and that would be funded by borrowing, and looking, building a huge number of houses, 100,000 council, 50,000 housing association houses, every single year of a Labour government, but also renationalising rail, green energy, massive investment in hospitals and all of that. There's a lot of people listening to this, whether or not they're Labour voters or not, would say they agree with an awful lot of that. Everyone knows we need more houses. Everyone knows we need more investment in the NHS. However, the question mark is whether you can actually increase that spending at the rate you're talking about, because the question mark is whether or not that can be done in simply one parliament, whether or not we've actually got the skills in the Labour, the number of bricks even to build that many houses that quickly, in terms of the huge programme of government you're talking about. This is for one parliament, isn't it? A lot of this isn't spread out over, it's not a 10-year or a 15-year plan.
No, the Green Transformation Fund is over a 10-year period, and yes,
the housing isn't though. The rail isn't.
No, it isn't. No. There are different. This is the point. There are different periods of time over which you do it. The country. Look, the bottom line is we've got a huge shortage of houses that hasn't been tackled. Now, at one point, you're going to have to tackle it, and you're not going to tackle it by having measly amounts of housing that have been built. You have to tackle it, so you have to skill up our economy. You have to have skills in the economy that deal with construction, quantity surveying, points that you're making about brick building. You have to start somewhere, and you start with an ambitious programme. And that's what we've lacked in this country.
So wait a minute.
For at least the last 10 years.
But you're saying
The
you're
ambition
starting with an ambitious
to do it.
programme, but you don't actually expect to deliver it. Is that what you're
we
saying?
No, we do expect to deliver
Okay.
it. But what I'm saying is that there's a difference between saying this is a programme which you use the word radical. By European standards...
Wait a minute, your leader used the word radical.
No, and it's radical for this country, yes. But by European standards, it isn't. And we're all so focused. We're all so focused on the way we've been handling things for the past 10 years or so that we just can't break out of this focus on this narrow lack of ambition in this country.
Okay, well, let's talk about this. You said earlier, this is consistent with what social democratic governments across Europe are doing, Scandinavian countries, many other Central European countries. And that is true. However, as the Institute of Fiscal Studies has said, but they fund it with taxes on people across the board. The Institute of Fiscal Studies said to us, look, 2/3 of all taxes in this country, tax take, is funded by VAT, national insurance and income tax. You're saying you're only going to tax the top 5% and businesses, and that no one else is going to have to pay any other tax rises. But every other country in Europe that has this sort of level of public spending, as you say, it's not unusual in Europe, but every other country that does have this level of public spending does have much more taxes on ordinary people at ordinary incomes. And if you want to raise public spending to the highest level ever in peacetime British history, you are going to have to raise taxes on everyone across the board and not just the top 5%. And that's where people are arguing about your figures.
Well, that may well be the case, but I'd just refer you to our document.
Are you saying it may well be the case you will raise taxes?
No, listen to what I'm saying. Is that we have Funding Real Change, our document, and it's set out on by page 5 how we would raise that additional revenue-raising measures, and they're set out there in relation to additional rate payable from £80,000. We set out what that would raise. Corporation tax, we set out that would raise. We set out financial transaction tax, how we would raise that, tackling tax avoidance and evasion, tax reliefs and tax reliefs review and expenditure. We've set that one out. We set them all out. They're perfectly clear now. I completely accept. People, you, for example, might not accept that, or you might like that we're spending it. We're raising it from those areas.
I'm quoting the Institute of Fiscal Studies. I'm not giving my opinion.
One mightn't like that. That's the point I'm saying. One mightn't accept that we can raise them from there, but they are there. You might not like where we're raising them from, but that's where we've identified clearly, unambiguously, where they're coming from in great detail. It is a document, as you said. The manifesto is set out the substance, and this document, the document, our grey book as we call it, Funding Real Change, sets out in great detail how we would raise it.
No, it does. There's undoubtedly. It's all, absolutely. It's costed. You've set it out in great detail. But independent figures, like the Institute of Fiscal Studies, are questioning, not the Tory party, the Institute of Fiscal Studies, who questioned a lot about Tory announcements.
We don't know what the Tory party are saying. You'll know those.
No, exactly. That's why I'm quoting to you what the Institute of Fiscal Studies is saying, who are recognised as an independent, respected think tank on this issue. And they're saying that the numbers you're claiming to raise from corporation tax to fund this, more than £23 billion, the number you're claiming to raise from income tax on just the top 5%, taxing global companies, tax share dividends, tackling tax avoidance. They're saying that it is unprecedented that any government in any country in any time in history has ever been able to fund the level of spending that you are looking at by simply making the changes you're looking at. They're saying that their numbers simply don't add up.
Over-egging the pudding about what the Institute for Fiscal Studies is saying there. In relation to corporation tax, they acknowledge that we could raise that. So let's take an example. We are moving from 19% corporation tax back up to 26%. That's what it was 10 years ago. That is the average in the G7. So let's not get overblown.
No, but the key thing is therefore in terms of how much extra money you get in from that, and where it's not hit elsewhere. Pointing out that companies they will put up their prices, they will also cut wages of their staff and cut dividends. That affects people on pensions. So ordinary people will be affected by those tax rises.
No, they won't, because the bottom line is, in France, for example, corporation tax is higher than here. In Germany, they are not affected by this.
What is the unemployment rate in France?
But people have
What is the unemployment rate in France, Peter?
Just let me finish. People have got to break out, but people have got to break out of this idea that we're restrained in the way we've been for at least the past 10 years. And
Okay.
I come back to the point I'm making. I keep on coming back to the point I'm making. When we came out of the financial crash, the banking crash caused by the banks, we effectively got to the stage where we said we're going to have to put money into the economy. We're going to have to try as best as we can to break out of this, and we didn't do it very successfully because we didn't invest.
Let's talk about some of the major policy announcements. We haven't got much time, unfortunately, but public sector workers, every public sector worker will get a one-off catch-up increase in pay of 5%. It's going to cost £5 billion, but an average worker would receive around £1,600. Of course, this would of course benefit higher earners more. Doctors who are already on good salaries will be getting a lot more than, say, hospital porters, for instance. Are you concerned that that's actually going to benefit better off people more than poorer people who you're more concerned about, you say?
Well, what it is, it's an attempt over the totality of the public sector who didn't get a pay rise for the first 2 years of the last Tory Liberal Democrat government and then had their pay capped by about for 1%. Many people didn't get a pay rise for years. It's an attempt to recognise that our public services are in a state of decay. We've got thousands, tens of thousands of vacancies in the NHS. We've got vacancies in schools. You said you had a teacher or a head teacher, former head teacher on. Mm-hmm. We've got loads of vacancies in schools, social care, social work.
Let's mention schools. Another major policy is to end free schools and academies. They'll all be abolished. All schools are going to return to town hall control, and you're going to get scrap Ofsted. Free schools and academies and Ofsted are all. Most people would argue have contributed to an increase in our school standards in recent years.
Evidence. No, I'm sorry, Julia.
There is quite a lot of evidence.
There isn't any substantive evidence to that at all. If anything, it's about neutral. There's no evidence for that whatsoever. That was Michael Gove's, his free schools, was his vanity project. I'm sorry, there's just no...
The results of free schools and of academies, the changes, that's pretty well documented.
Well, we'll agree to differ, and I'm happy to come and talk to you about that on another.
Well, I hope you will. And let's talk to Rishi Sunak, who's Chief Secretary to the Treasury for the Conservatives, of course. Good morning to you, Rishi.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you very much for joining us. We're going to be talking about a Labour Party manifesto as well, because, of course, that's been the big party launch that we've seen in the last 24 hours. First up, though, you've got a policy that is going to be announced today, in terms of Boris Johnson trying to tackle the issue, particularly an issue, I think, in London and the metropolitan area around that, but not for perhaps the rest of the country, about foreign buyers buying up homes which perhaps would be available to Brits to buy otherwise. What are you going to do?
You're absolutely right. We think that everyone should be supported in their aspiration to own their own home. What we've announced today is a policy to help just that. Today, the situation is if you're a foreign company or someone living abroad, it's just as easy for you to buy a property here in the UK as it is for someone living, working and building a life here. We don't think that's right, so we're saying that we'll have a 3% stamp duty charge on those foreign purchases. That should help make housing more affordable for people who are living and working here, help them get on the housing ladder. And I think in contrast to Jeremy Corbyn, who has attacked home ownership as being a national obsession, we believe it is an aspiration that deserves support.
And yet, let's face it, that doesn't really touch the sides of the housing crisis we do have in our country. I think there's one thing that every political party agrees on, every voter. We do have a housing crisis, a shortage of the right level of affordable housing in the right areas for people to either rent or to buy. The Labour Party is announcing an end to the right to buy for council homes. They're also announcing a major house building project, trebling the number of houses that are actually built in this country, and massive increase in the number of social houses, 100,000 council, 50,000 housing association. Why is the Conservative Party not pledging to match something in the region of that, whether it's private or social housing, when we know that we do need more houses built? And everything the Tories have done so far when it comes to helping people get on the housing ladder has been about affecting the numbers of people able to buy as opposed to the number of properties available to purchase.
Well, I would say look at the record. We're doing a lot of things, and last year we saw a record number of new homes delivered, 240,000. That's the highest number in 30 years of new homes delivered. So we are tackling that problem of supply.
But many of those completely unaffordable to ordinary earners.
No, actually, we've had 250,000 affordable houses built since we've been in office, and we
built 9 years.
We built more council houses. We built more council houses last year. The housing secretary is never Shai, to remind us all, than in 1 year we built more council houses than the entire last Labour government. So across housing tenures, we're making a difference. As I said, housing delivery is at a 30-year high. But you're right, this is a big issue. Housing is a big issue. And the point that we would make is you can't focus on these other issues. They don't get the attention they deserve unless we can get Brexit sorted and behind us so we can start focusing on this. And that's the clear choice at this election is, you get a majority Conservative government, we can get Brexit done in a matter of weeks, and then we can move on and focus on the NHS, schools, policing, and yes, you're right, housing. The alternative is if you spend next year with more referendums, more delay, more going round in circles on Brexit, we will get no progress on these very important issues.
OK, well, we know the Tory mantra in this election is get Brexit done. We're hearing that again and again. It's on all the posters and in all the broadcasts. However, there are big question marks for a lot of voters about whether this is the Brexit election or not, or whether or not it is about public services and an end to austerity. Now, things are very different from 2017. Theresa May, when she launched her manifesto, was talking about continuing austerity. Boris Johnson, the current Tory leader and Prime Minister, is very much talking about opening spending up again on hospitals, on police and on other issues. The trouble is your numbers are being dwarfed by the Labour Party offers. Are you concerned at all that actually the big giveaway that we are looking at from the Labour Party manifesto published yesterday, and the promise, whether people believe it or not, that 95% of people won't have to pay a penny extra in tax for that to be delivered, is actually going to tempt an awful lot of voters to say this isn't about Brexit, this is about spending on the public sector?
I think what people should be concerned about is Corbyn's Labour Party hitting their wallets. And independent economic experts yesterday used words like vast, colossal and unprecedented to describe the scale of Labour's spending plans. They also said Labour can't pretend that you can fund all of that with taxes just on companies and rich people. It will be everybody who pays the price in their wallets. We've said £2,400 a year will be the cost of it. But the point here is when people look at this manifesto, they will see things that we have never dreamt of, and people should be, as you said, deeply concerned that it will hit them in their wallets. That is a clear contrast to our offer, where we have said we will have a responsible economic management. As the Prime Minister said, we're going to take the lowest paid, start moving them even greater out of tax with our national insurance cut, and make sure that at the end of the Parliament, debt is lower as a percentage of GDP than it is today. That is in stark contrast to the reckless spending that we're seeing from the Labour Party.
The reality is, though, if you are, let's say, looking to go to university, don't want to take out, best part of 50 grand in debt, you might be entitled to a maintenance grant under Labour. If you work in the public sector, you're being offered a 5% pay rise and then above inflation pay rises in future. If you're on benefits and the benefit cap is going to be pledged, a lot of those policies are going to be very, very attractive to an awful lot of voters.
Well, I think the British people have an enormous ability to see through promises that they know can't be funded and that are simply not sensible. And as I said, you've got independent economic experts saying it is just not remotely credible that ordinary taxpayers don't end up paying the price for all this profligacy. I think that message is resonating with people. And the contrast is clear. With the Conservative Party, where's our focus? It's on we've paused the corporation tax cut. We're investing responsibly in public services and long-term infrastructure, levelling up opportunity, and taking the lowest paid out of tax with our plans for national insurance. And debt will be lower at the end of the Parliament, and people won't feel it in their wallets the way they will with these plans from Corbyn's Labour. But again, I go back to the central point is you can't focus on any of these other things unless you get Brexit done. And you said is this Brexit election or not? It absolutely is, because that is the dominant issue we've been gridlocked in paralysis for the last few years. And unless we get it sorted, we can't move on and talk about all these other things. And that's what the Conservative Party offers at this election. It's a clear choice.
I mean, just finally, there's been a lot of criticism of party leaders who are avoiding debates, avoiding questions. Boris Johnson, in fact, has dodged more questions from the media and public debates on television and on radio than any of the other party leaders. We also saw the other day that the Daily Mirror were booted off the Tory battle bus because of their critical coverage. Are we moving into Trumpian territory where we simply don't take questions from people unless they agree with us? And isn't that a rather dangerous territory for the Tory party or any party in this country to put themselves in?
I think the Prime Minister we just had these head-to-head debates, one set this week. He's doing these question time interviews tonight. We've got another leaders head-to-head debate a week before polling day. And then we've got two debates next week with representatives of all the major parties there, on top of all the regular interviews that he's doing from all of your colleagues in the media industry. I think there's no shortage of scrutiny. And again, whether it's a prime minister, whether it's someone else, whether it's on your show or on Question Time, you're going to hear the same message from us. A majority Conservative government that gets Brexit done and then gets on to focusing on your priorities like the NHS, schools and crime. Anyone else is more delay and no progress.
Should any newspaper be excluded from a party, any political party battle bus, simply because they don't agree with the views of the party?
I'm not in charge of what happens on the battle bus, but I don't know the details of that. But I think, as I said, there is an enormous amount.
Sure, you would agree that shouldn't be acceptable in a modern democracy with a free press.
I mean, I've seen all sorts of papers put lots of difficult questions to me and lots of other representatives from the government. I don't think there's any shortage of debate and scrutiny that's happening in this election.
Right.
And the message, as I said, regardless of who's doing it, the message will be clear: get Brexit done and move on, or a year of referendums, delay and no progress.